morning. We're on page 595 now, starting part 4. The soul in the barbed wire. Quote is, "Behold, I shew a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed." 1 Corinthians. Others probably already know this quote a lot better than myself. This is a quote in reference to the second coming, and that Christians, whether they've died or not, we shall not all sleep. Whether they've died or not, they will all be resurrected. Provides assurance of victory over death, promising a resurrection that transforms the body from natural to spiritual. So I think this is going to be a good part. Good section. Chapter 1, the Ascent. Page 597. And the years go by, not in swift staccato as a joking camp, winter, summer, but a long drawn-out autumn, an endless winter, an unwilling spring, and only a summer that is short. In the archipelago, summer is short. Even one mere year, phew, how long that lasts. Even in 1 year, how much time is left for you to think? For 330 days, you stomp out to line up in a drizzling, slushy rain, and in a piercing blizzard, and inviting and still sub-zero cold. For 330 days, you work away at hateful, alien work, with your mind unoccupied. For 330 evenings, you squinch up, wet, chilled, in the end of work, and lineup, waiting for the convoy to assemble from the distant watchtowers, and then there is the march out, and the march back, and bending down over 730 bowls of gruel, excuse me, and 730 portions of grits, yes, and waking up and going to sleep on your multiple bunk, and neither radio nor books to distract you. There are none, and thank God. And that is only 1 year. And there are 10. There are 25. And then 2 when you are lying in the hospital with dystrophy. That too is a good time to think. Draw some conclusions from misfortune. Excuse me. And all that in this time, after all, prisoners' brains and souls are not inactive. In the mass and from a distance, they seem like swarming lights, but they are the crown of creation, right? After all, once upon a time, a weak little spark of God was breathed into them too. Is it not true? So what has become of it now? For centuries it was considered that a criminal was given a sentence for precisely this purpose, to think about his crime for the whole period of his sentence, to be conscience-stricken, repent, and gradually reform. But the archipelago knows no pangs of conscience. Out of 100 natives, 5 are thieves, and their transgressions are no reproach in their own eyes, but a mark of valor. They dream of carrying out such feats in the future even more brazenly and cleverly. They have nothing to repent. Another 5 stole on a big scale, but not from people. In our times, the only place where one can steal on a big scale is from the state, which itself squanders the people's money without pity or sense. So what was there for such types to repent of? Maybe that they had not stolen more and divvied up, and thus remained free. And so far as another 85% of the natives were concerned, they had never committed any crimes whatever. What were they supposed to repent of? That they had thought what they thought? Nonetheless, they managed to pound and muddle some of them to such an extent that they did repent of being so depraved. Let us remember the desperation of Nina Paragood because she was unworthy of Zoya K, or that a man had surrendered and become a POW in a hopeless situation, or that he had taken employment under the Germans instead of dying of starvation. Nonetheless, they managed to so confuse what was permitted and what was forbidden that there were some such who were tormented greatly. I would have done better to die than to have earned that bread, or that while working for nothing in the collective farm fields, he had taken a mite to feed his children, or that he had taken something from a factory for the same reason. No, not only do you not repent, but your clean conscience, like a clear mountain lake, shines in your eyes, and your eyes, purified by suffering, infallibly perceive the least haze in other eyes. For example, they infallibly pick out stool pigeons, and the Chekhov is not aware of this capacity of ours to see with the eyes of truth. It is our secret weapon against that institution, and state security slips up here with us. It was in this nearly unanimous conscience of our innocence that the main distinction arose between us and the hard labor prisoners of Dostoevsky, the hard labor prisoners of Yakubovich. There they were conscious of being doomed renegades, whereas we were confidently aware that they could haul in any free person at all. In just the same way they had hauled us in. The barbed wire was only a nominal dividing line between us. In earlier times there had been, among the majority, the unconditional consciousness of personal guilt, and among us, the consciousness of a disaster on a mammoth scale. Just not to perish from the disaster. It had to be survived. Wasn't this the root cause of the astounding rarity of camp suicides? Yes, rarity, although every ex-prisoner could in all probability recall a case of suicide, but he could not even recall more escapes. But he could recall even more escapes. There were certainly more escapes than suicides. Admirers of socialist realism can praise me. I am pursuing an optimistic line. And there were far more self-inflicted injuries, too, than there were suicides. But this, too, is an act indicating love of life, a straightforward calculation of sacrificing a portion to save the whole. I even imagine that, statistically speaking, there were fewer suicides per 1,000 of the population in camp than in freedom. I have no way of verifying this, of course. But Skripnikova recalls how a man 30 years old hanged himself in 1931 in the women's toilet at Medvedchugorsk and hanged himself on the very day he was to be released. So maybe it was out of a feeling of disgust for the freedom of that time. 2 years earlier his wife had abandoned him, but he had not hanged himself then, while the designer Baranov hanged himself in the club of the main camp center in Biropolem. The Communist Party official Aramovich, a second-termer, hanged himself in 1947 in the garret of the machinery repair factory in Knyazhpogotsk. In Krasnodar during the war years, Lithuanians who had been reduced to a state of total despair, mainly because nothing in their former lives had prepared them for cruelties, marched on infantrymen so as to get themselves shot down. In 1949, in the interrogation cell of Vladimir Volinsk, A young fellow, stunned by his interrogation, tried to hang himself, but Baronek pulled him down in time. At the Kaluga gates, a former Latvian officer who was hospitalized in the camp infirmary began to creep stealthily up some stairs. They led to the incomplete empty upper stories. The Tsechka nurse saw him and went in pursuit. She caught up with him on the open balcony of the 6th floor. She caught him by the bathrobe, but the suicidal slipped off the robe and stepped off into nothingness, dressed in his underwear, and flashed past like a white streak of lightning in a plain sight of busy Bolshaya Kalushkaya street on a sunny summer day. When Emmy, a German communist, learned about her husband's death, she left the barracks in sub-zero weather, undressed so as to catch cold. The Englishman Kelly, in the Vladimir special purpose prison, very skillfully cut his veins with the door wide open and the jailer right there on the threshold. I repeat, there are many others who can recount similar cases, but nonetheless, out of tens of millions who have served time, their total number will be small. Even among these examples, it is clear that a much greater proportion of suicides is accounted for by foreigners, Westerners. From them, the transition to the archipelago was a more shattering blow than for us, so they put an end to it. And suicides were frequent among the loyalists too, but not among the hardheads. And one can understand why. After all, their heads must have got thoroughly mixed up and filled with incessant buzzing. How could they stand it? Zosia Zaleska, a Polish noblewoman who had devoted her entire life to the cause of communism by serving in the Soviet intelligence service, tried to commit suicide 3 times during her interrogation. She tried to hang herself. They pulled her down. She cut her veins, but they stopped her. She jumped onto the windowsill on the 7th floor, but the drowsy interrogator managed to grab hold of her by her dress. They saved her life 3 times so they could shoot her. And anyway, what is the correct interpretation of suicide? Hans Bernstein, for example, insists that suicides are not at all cowards, that great willpower is required for suicide. He himself wove a rope out of bandages and throttled himself by lifting his feet off the floor. But green circles appeared before his eyes and there was a ringing in his ears, and each time he involuntarily put his feet back on the ground. During his last try, the homemade rope broke, and he felt glad that he was still alive. I'm not going to dispute that perhaps even in the most extreme despair, you still need the willpower to commit suicide. For a long time, I would not have taken it upon myself to pass judgment on this at all. All my life long, I was absolutely convinced that I would never consider suicide in any circumstances whatever. But not so long ago, I dragged my way through gloomy months when it seemed to me that my whole life's cause had perished, especially if I remained alive. And I remember very clearly indeed the revulsion against life that came over me and the sensation that to die was easier than to live. In my opinion, in a state that requires more strength of will to stay alive than to die. In a state like that, it requires more strength of will to stay alive than to die. But in all probability, with other people in a different extremity, this turns out differently. And that is why, from time immemorial, the 2 opinions have existed. It is a very spectacular idea to imagine all the innocently outraged millions beginning to commit suicide en masse, causing double vexation to the government, both by demonstrating their innocence and by depriving the government of free manpower. And maybe the government would have had to soften up and begin to take pity on its subjects. Well, hardly. Stalin wouldn't have been stopped by that, he would have merely picked up another 20 million people from freedom. But it did not happen. People died by the hundreds of thousands and millions, driven, it would seem, to the extremity of extremities. But for some reason there were no suicides. Condemned to a misshapen existence, to waste away from starvation, to exhaustion from labor, they did not put an end to themselves. And thinking the whole thing over, I found that proof to be stronger. A suicide is always a bankrupt, always a human being in a blind alley, a human being who has gambled his life and lost, and is without the will to continue to struggle. If these millions of helpless and pitiful vermin still did not put an end to themselves, this meant some kind of invincible feeling was alive inside them, some very powerful idea. This was their feeling of universal innocence. It was the sense of an ordeal of the entire people, like the Tatar yoke. But what if one has nothing to repent of? What then? What then does the prisoner think about all the time? Poverty in prison? Give wisdom? They do. But where is it to be directed? Here is how it was with many others, not just with me. Our initial first prison sky consisted of black swirling storm clouds and black pillars of volcanic eruptions. This was the heaven of Pompeii, the heaven of the Day of Judgment, because it was not just anyone who had been arrested, but I, the center of the world. This world. Our last prison sky was infinitely high, infinitely clear, even paler than sky blue. We all, except religious believers, began from one point. We tried to tear our hair out from our head, but our hair had been clipped close. How could we? How could we not have seen those who informed against us? How could we not have seen our enemies, and how we hated them? How could we avenge ourselves on them? And what recklessness, what blindness, how many errors, how can they be corrected? They must be corrected all the more swiftly. We must write, we must speak out, we must communicate. But there is nothing we can do, and nothing is going to save us. At the appropriate time, we will sign Form 206. At the appropriate time, the tribunal will read us our sentences in our presence, or we will learn it in absentia from the OSO. Then there begins the period of transit prisons, interspersed with our thoughts about our camp future, about our future camp. We now love to recall our past, how well we used to live, even if we lived badly. But how many unused opportunities there were, how many flowers were left uncrumpled. When will we now make up for it? If I only manage to survive, oh, how differently, how wisely I am going to live. The day of our future release, it shines like a rising sun. And the conclusion is, survive to reach it, survive at any price. This is simply a turn of phrase, a sort of habit of speech, at any price. But then the words swell up in their full meaning, and an awesome vow takes shape, to survive at any price. And whatever takes that vow, and whoever takes that vow, whoever does not blink before its crimson burst, allows its own misfortune to overshadow both the entire common misfortune and the whole world. This is a great fork of camp life. From this point, the roads go to the right and to the left. One of them will rise and the other will descend. If you go to the right, you lose your life, and if you go to the left, you lose your conscience. One's own order to oneself, survive, is the natural splash of a living person. Who does not wish to survive? Who does not have the right to survive? Straining all the strength of our body in order to all ourselves survive. A powerful charge is introduced into the chest cavity, and the heart is surrounded by an electrical cloud so as not to stop beating. They lead 30 emaciated but wiry Zeks 3 miles across the Arctic ice to a bathhouse. The bath is not worth even a warm word. 6 men at a time wash themselves in 5 shifts, and the door opens straight into the sub-zero temperature, and 4 shifts are obliged to stand there before or after bathing, because they cannot be left without convoy. And not only does none of them get pneumonia, they don't even catch cold. And for 10 years, one old man had his bath just like that, serving out his term from age 50 to 60. But then he was released. He was at home, warm and cared for. He burned up in 1 month's time. That order survive was not there. But simply to survive does not yet mean at any price. At any price means at the price of someone else. Let us admit the truth, and that great fork in the camp road, and that great divider of souls. It was not the majority of the prisoners that turned to the right, alas, not the majority, but fortunately neither was it just a few. There are many of them, human beings, who made this choice, but they did not shout about themselves. You had to look closely to see them. Dozens of times the same choice has arisen before them too, but they always knew their own stand. Take Arnold Susi, who was sent to camp at the age of about 50. He had never been a believer, but he had always been fundamentally decent. He had never led any other kind of life, and he was not about to begin any other. He was a Westerner, and what that meant was that he was doubly unprepared and kept putting his foot into it all the time and getting into serious difficulties. He worked at general work. And he was imprisoned in a penalty camp, and he still managed to survive. He survived exactly the same kind of person he had been when he came to camp. I knew him at the very beginning, and I knew him afterward, and I can testify personally. True that there were 3 serious mitigating circumstances which accompanied him through his camp life. He was classified as an invalid. For several years he received parcels, and thanks to his musical abilities, he got some additional nourishment out of amateur theatricals. But these 3 circumstances only explain why he survived. If they had not existed, he would have died. But he would not have changed. And perhaps those who died did die because they did not change. And Tereshkovich, a perfectly ordinary, straightforward person, recalls, there were many prisoners prepared to grovel for a bread ration or a puff of Mahorka smoke. I was dying, but I kept my soul pure. I always called a spade a spade. It has been known for many centuries that prison causes a profound rebirth of a human being. The examples are innumerable, such as that of Silvio Pellico. Through serving 8 years, he was transformed from a furious carbonaro to a meek Roman Catholic. In our country, they always mention Dostoevsky in this respect, but what about Pisarev? What remained of his revolutionary rebelliousness after imprisonment in the Peter and Paul fortress? One can certainly debate whether it is good for revolution, but these transformations always proceed in the direction of deepening the soul. It's been wrote, from lack of oxygen, even the conscience will wither. By no means It is not by any means so simple. In fact, it is the very opposite. Take General Gorbatov. He had fought from his very youth and advanced through the ranks of the army and had no time at all in which to think about things. But he was imprisoned, and how good it was. Various events awakened him within his recollection, such as his having suspected an innocent man of espionage, or having ordered by mistake the execution of a quite innocent Pole. Well, when else would he have remembered this? After rehabilitation, he did not remember such things very much. Enough has been written about prisoners' changes of heart to raise it to the level of penological theory. For example, in the pre-revolutionary prison Herald, Solzhenitsyn wrote, "Darkness renders a person more sensitive to light. Involuntary inactivity and imprisonment arouses in him a thirst for life, movement, work. The quiet compels profound pondering over his own eye, over surrounding conditions, over his own past and present, and forces him to think about his future." Our teachers, who had never served time themselves, felt for prisoners only the natural sympathy of the outsider. Dostoevsky, however, who served time himself, was a proponent of punishment, and this is something worth thinking about. The proverb says, "Freedom spoils, and the lack of freedom teaches." But Pellico and Solzhenitsyn wrote about prison, but Dostoevsky demanded punishment in prison. But what kind of lack of freedom is it that educates? Camp? That is something to think about. Of course, in comparison with prison, our camps were poisonous and harmful. Of course, they were not concerned with our souls when they pumped up the archipelago, but nonetheless, it is really hopeless to stand. Is it really hopeless to stand fast in camp? And more than that, was it really impossible for one's soul to rise in camp? Here is E.K., who was born around 1940, one of those boys who, under Khrushchev, gathered to read poems on Mayakovsky Square, but were hauled off instead in Black Maria from a Potma camp. He writes to his girl, "Here, all the trivia and fuss have decreased. I've experienced a turning point. Here you hearken to that voice deep inside you, which amid the surfeit and vanity used to be stifled by the roar from the outside." At the Samarkand camp in 1946, a group of intellectuals had reached the very brink of death. They were worn down by the hunger, cold, and worked beyond their powers, and they were even deprived of sleep. They had nowhere to lie down. Dugout barracks had not yet been built. Did they go and steal, or squeal, or whimper about their ruined lives? No. Foreseeing the approach of death in days rather than weeks, here is how they spent their last sleepless leisure, sitting up against the wall. Timofey Rozovsky gathered them into a seminar, and they hastened to share with one another what one of them knew and the others did not. They delivered their last lectures to each other. Father Savely spoke of unshameful death, a priest academician about patristics, one of the Unite Fathers, about something in the area of dogmatics and canonical writing, an electrical engineer on the principles of the energetics of the future, and a Leningrad economist on how the effort to create principles of Soviet economics had failed for lack of new ideas. Timofey Rosovsky himself talked about the principles of microphysics from one session to the next. Participants were missing. They were already in the morgue. That is the sort of person who can be interested in all this while already growing numb with approaching death. Now that is an intellectual. Pardon me, you love life? You who exclaim and sing over and over and dance too. I love you, life. Oh, I love you, life. Do you? Well, go on, love it. Camp life, love that too. It too is life. There where there is no struggle with fate, there you will resurrect your soul. You have understood a thing. You haven't understood a thing. When you get there, you'll collapse. Along our chosen road are twists and turns, uphill or up into the heavens. Let's go, let's stumble and stagger. The day of liberation. What can it give us after so many years? We will change unrecognizably, and so will our near and dear ones, and places which once were dear to us will seem stranger than strange. And the thought of freedom, after a time, even becomes a forced thought, far-fetched, strange. The day of liberation, as if there weren't any liberty in this country, or as if it weren't possible to liberate anyone who has not first become liberated in his own soul. The stones roll down from under our feet, downward into the past. They are the ashes of the past, and we ascend. Thank you for listening. See you tomorrow. Have a good day.